This is Derek Logue from OnceFallen.com, and this is a So Clear response video to the John Canzano article posted on June 10, 2017 at OregonLive.com entitled A Deep Dive on Luke Heimlich, A Sex Offense Should Not Split the Public. This article is part of a series of articles that attack an Oregon State University pitcher as it was revealed that as a teenager he committed a sex offense and is a level 1 registrant and is currently playing on the Oregon State University baseball team, and OSU baseball is in the 2017 College World Series. They just won one of their regional games here recently, and so they're advancing, but the person at the center of the story, that was at the center of attacks, has recused himself from the rest of the games, as far as I can tell. And chances are his career as a baseball player is probably over at this point. If it continues at any point, I would be absolutely shocked, because the Oregonian blitzed with a series of articles bringing out his past and then condemning the university for playing him and not knowing that he was a person who was on the registry. And the Oregonian actually wrote two articles, one during the initial 4-article blitz, and one more recently, which is the one that came out on June the 10th, which is the John Canzano piece that I'm about to give my rebuttal against. And the reason for picking this particular article as opposed to all the other ones is because this one is really absurd. It's an A to S bullet point presentation, as to why we should all agree with John Canzano and the way the Oregonian handled this particular story. I personally believe that this is a hit piece and nothing more. It's not journalism. It's not yellow journalism. It's not even brown journalism. This was a straight up coordinated attack on a registered citizen who has served his time and should be allowed to become a productive member of society. Well, this is the way I'm going to do this. I mean, first of all, you can look at the actual article by going to the description of this video, and I will post a link to the article. Of course, what I'm going to do is I'm going to read this article in its entirety. Now, it's a long article. I mean, obviously, it's bullet points from the letter A to the letter S, so that's 18, 19 bullet points there. And so this might take a while. I'm going to try to get through this as quickly as possible because nobody wants to hear me ramble for an hour. So here's the article, and then of course after each bullet point I'll give a response. It says, what we learned this week about Oregon State pitcher Luke Heimlich has resulted in a splintered discussion with a lot of tentacles. There's been a lot of healthy dialogue on sex abuse, sports, a university campus, and journalism. There aren't just two camps here. That's why this has splintered the public. Some things on my mind. Bullet point A. Can we start with the premise that human life matters? Anyone disagree on that? This isn't a complicated starting point. The young relative who was molested by Heimlich deserves your thoughts and respect. The victim matters. She matters more than Heimlich. She matters more than baseball. She matters, period. Anyone disagree there? My response is, when you start with the premise that human life matters, then you also have to consider that Heimlich is a human. And by saying that one life matters more than another, then you're really just plagiarizing Orwell. The first thing that came to my mind was George Orwell's Animal Farm. All animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. Who are we to decide? And that's the thing. The man has served his time. He's no longer a prison inmate. So he committed his offense as a teenager. And now that he served his time, he is given an equal opportunity to become a productive member of society. And by doing so, that's not saying that his life matters more. It's saying that it's just merely stating that his life matters. So to me, he's already starting on a hypocritical note here. Bullet point B. Some people, myself included, don't believe a registered sex offender has a place on a major college athletics team. I don't believe an athlete who has committed a violent offense, including domestic offense, belongs here either. That's why I was proud of Oregon State President Dr. Edward Ray when he championed a policy that banned transfer athletes with conduct issues. Playing a sport isn't just a privilege, it's the front line of your campus. If you have a sex offender or a violent offender wearing your university's name across his chest, you're going to have a difficult time convincing anyone you're not condoning the action. Enablers are everywhere in major sports. That's why I was so troubled by the fact that this surfaced. I respect Pat Casey immensely. Also, Ray, who sat as the head of the committee that slammed Penn State with sanctions in the wake of Jerry Sandusky. Now, there's a lot to discuss right here. First of all, for the sake of those who aren't really sports fanatics or follow sports whatsoever, there are a lot of instances in which sports players have committed crimes or have committed some serious off the field issues, and each and every one of them, their journeys have been completely different. I mean, probably the example that hits the closest to home to those of us on the registry is the fact that Iron Mike Tyson went to prison for a number of years for rape, and it was at the height of his career, and he was able to come back, be reinstated into the world of boxing, and play the sport that made him famous. Um, I would say that all other sports in general, they've been very contrary in the way that they've handled many people. For example, the way that Ray Rice, who was a professional football player, he was a running back for the Baltimore Ravens professional sports team, and he had an incident of domestic violence in which he had assaulted his wife in an elevator, or girlfriend, whatever she was to him, significant other. He was suspended, but then the news media had gotten a hold of the actual video, so you can actually see him in the elevator arguing and fighting with his significant other. And that, of course, once that was released to the public, there was a lot of outrage, and then Ray Rice was suspended for pretty much the rest of the season. And when he went up to free agency, no team had picked him up on contract. Now, another NFL player, Ben Roethlisberger, who is the quarterback for the Pittsburgh Steelers, he's won a Super Bowl, has gotten the Steelers in a Super Bowl a time or two and to the playoffs many times. He was accused some years ago of sexually assaulting a woman, and ultimately she dropped the charges, but the NFL saw fit to suspend him for 8 games, which I think they ultimately reduced it to 6 games, but the mere fact that he was accused of a sex crime, he was suspended for pretty much a third of the season, and of course that's significant because that's without pay. But these were crimes that were committed by players that were on the current roster. They were brawl players at the time these offenses happened or the accusation happened. Is probably I would say it's questionable, about the suspension of Ben Roethlisberger. I think there was a crazy way in which they justified it. If I recall, they were like, well, he put himself in a position that compromised the ethics of being a pro football player and stuff. So that's what, some lame BS excuse. I'm not a Pittsburgh Steelers fan, and I can't stand them. I'm a Bengals fan. And speaking of the Bengals just signed Joe Mixon from the University of Oklahoma. And the reason why I bring him up is much like Ray Rice, he was involved in a domestic violence incident in which he had punched a woman in a restaurant, and he was suspended from playing football for an entire season. But the University of Oklahoma, they allowed him to come back and play out the rest of his time, and he did well. And and he's been given a second chance. And speaking of second chances, even John Canzano himself wrote a story a few years ago about a football player who, in his teenage years, um, had assaulted somebody at a party, and because of the injuries that the other person had sustained, that person died. And so this football player, I believe his last name was Wood, um, he was arrested and given a sentence for assault. Um, they didn't charge him with manslaughter, which is kind of shocking, but but he was able to. He went through the rehab programs and whatnot, juvenile justice and all that. And the University of Oregon gave him a chance to play on the football team. And so, at least he made as much as he could out of the opportunity. From what I understand, he didn't graduate from college, but he was thankful for his second chance. And while he didn't end up playing professional sports, this guy apparently got a pretty decent paying job somewhere, um, making airplane parts or something, and got married, had children, and he's living a pretty decent life. So he was able to get a second chance. So the message overall here is, if you kill somebody, John Canzano will forgive you, but if you commit a sex crime, then you don't deserve to play sports. It just, to me, that's a little bit hypocritical, but that's also a microcosm of the way our society feels about sex crimes as opposed to murder or robbing a bank or anything else. Bullet point C. I don't believe Casey knew about Heimlich's past until the Oregonian / Oregon Live discovered it. Doesn't excuse him. It's exposed a flaw in his recruiting process. A source inside the baseball program told me on Friday that Casey doesn't conduct background checks when recruiting. He never has. My suspicion is that a lot of major league coaches heard about this story, turned to their staff and said, we need to conduct background checks, like now. Casey should have known. Someone on his staff should have caught it before reporter Daddy Moran did. Well, I would say that that's not necessarily true. A lot of times juvenile records are sealed. And so running a background check on prospective sports players or anybody else coming to the university would usually be a fruitless search. Now, the thing is, he wouldn't have shown up even if they did a sex offender registry check, because the state of Oregon only posts high risk sex offenders. And even in Washington State, where the kid came from, level 1 registrants, and he's a level 1 in Oregon, which means low, or in Washington State, which means low risk, at low 1 out of a 3. He would not even be listed publicly on the Washington State registry. And so the chances that, yes, there is a chance that it may not have come up. And the thing about it is, it was even reported in some of the other articles, as well as commented by other people, that the NCAA doesn't make this a requirement. See, and again, this goes back to the difference between dealing with a person like Ray Rice, who is currently on a sports team while committing a crime, as opposed to somebody who has a criminal record but is keeping a clean reputation upon entering the sports world. It's two different matters, because at that time they have no jurisdiction. They can't condemn somebody for something that didn't happen when not on their watch. So it just does not make sense. It's just, again, this is just Canzano's personal opinion. Bullet point D. Moran is not your enemy. He's a great reporter who did great work. As he's indicated, he was in the process of reporting and writing a profile of Heimlich when he ran a routine background check. He learned in mid-May about Heimlich's future to register as a sex offender in Oregon and immediately requested the case file that triggered the registration requirement. The court documents arrived just last week from Washington State. I keep hearing people complain about the timing of the story. Moran worked hard along with investigative reporter Brad Schmidt to vet the details of the case, obtain all the pertinent documents, and make contact with all parties. That's good reporting. We're in an era where media is castigated for rushing to judgment and publishing without the facts. You can't have it both ways. So if you're among those making threats at the reporters, get a grip. By the way, when is the good timing for a news that a registered sex offender is on the baseball team? How about never? How about you shouldn't have ran the fucking report to begin with? So anyways, first of all, I would not consider Moran's story to be journalism. And, at least not the kind of investigative journalism one would expect from from an established, well-reputed media outlet. But then again, we're talking about the Oregonian. It's not exactly like they have the highest standards in the world. I mean, after all, back in 2013, they're the ones that declared Oregon was sex offender haven, and because they only publish high-risk offenders on the registry, and they should publish 100%, and they should follow the Adam Walsh Act, and a law that's so controversial that 2/3 of states have rejected it outright. So there you go. The Oregonian has a reputation for using their platform not for journalism, but for activism, what they feel to be right. That is not being objective. This story was not objective. They found something salacious, and in a kind of action that you would expect from, say, the National Enquirer or something, they went and dug up as much as they could about this person. I don't think it's just about the timing. Yes, you might be able to argue that it's just coincidental, but I don't really believe so. Especially given the fact that Canzano is trying to drive the point home that if you're a registered citizen, you don't deserve to be on a sports team. So you can't tell me that he's not biased in this. And if they received this information all this time ago, obviously they waited until now to make an issue out of it, and so I believe that the time is right. You also have to consider the fact that each of the 4 initial articles on this subject, the initial one by Nanny Moran that he's referring to, the first rebuttal piece was written and released 5 minutes after the first one, and then there was another article that pretty much, they had pretty much got the drop on the president of OSU and demanded that he condemn this kid for quote unquote hiding his past. He didn't have to hide his past. It wasn't even a question that was even asked on the on the application to come to the university to play. So, it's not even a NCAA standard to say, okay, if you have a criminal record or you have a record of a certain type of crime, we're not going to let you play sports, period. And yes, you are in an era where the media is castigated for rushing to judgment and publishing without the facts. Well, yes, even now you have published without the facts. You rushed to judgment. You coordinated an effort. You got together with the 3 other reporters to blitz this story, to promote it, and then justify your actions. That is exactly why the media deserves to be castigated for the kind of behavior that they do. Moving on. Back to Casey. This is bullet point E. Back to Casey. Let's suppose he didn't know, and I believe he did not. Heimlich graduated high school early, arrived on campus, and kept the fact that he was a registered sex offender to himself. I understand the motivation here. It's not something he should be proud about. So Casey's watched him for the last 3 or 4 years, and all he's seen is a good student and pitcher. That's all the information he has to go on until he's blindsided by the news that Heimlich did something terrible, awful, and inexcusable to a 6-year-old when he was 15 years old. It's an awful spot for Casey to be in. I suspect that had Casey known about Heimlich's past, he wouldn't have given him a scholarship. But what about now? Okay, my response to this, okay, well, if everything he says is indeed true, and, this is pretty much an accurate assessment of what's going on, I think we're already starting to see what's happening now. Heimlich has recused himself from the team. I seriously doubt he'll come back. I seriously doubt that he'll be drafted into Major League Baseball. And if by some chance he is, because because Major League Baseball isn't keeping up with what's going on, which I believe that they are, because according to some reports, he's already been taking off of some of the draft boards from some of the teams because of this. So it's hard for me to believe that that word has not gotten around. I mean, especially with it being on ESPN now. I mean, it seems like Heimlich would just rather crawl into a hole and hide, and I don't really blame him. I mean, after all, even Canzano understands why somebody like Heimlich would hide his past, because it is exactly what is going on right now with this media blitz. What I think would be a damn good reason to hide the fact that you're a former offender. Everybody who is a registered person is not going to go around and proclaim it from the rooftops that they are. Well, maybe me, but only because my job requires it. After all, my job as an activist requires me to promote my message, to be a public figure, in order to try to draw people to the activism realm, the anti-registry movement, or whatever you people want to call this movement. But outside of the few people like me, most everybody want to keep a low profile, because they know damn good and well that the minute people find out you're on the registry, there's always the possibility that you might face vigilante attacks. You might get chased out of your home. You might get chased out of your workplace. You might end up having to be homeless or welfare dependent or something, because you're not giving the opportunity to become a productive member of society. So yes, who in the hell would want to go out there and put it out there? And if you don't ask, you ain't going to tell. And his only motivation for doing so would be no more than to be able to have the opportunity to go as far as he can without being harassed by members of the media or anybody else for that matter. And that's exactly what happened in this story. Moving on to bullet point F. Worth noting that Heimlich was apparently ignorant of Oregon law that requires sex offenders to register in person within 10 days of their 21st birthday. He was cited for this. That's on him. If you're a registered sex offender, you better make it your business to know the law. Anyone blaming the law enforcement officer who caught the failure to re-register, stop now. That officer is trying to protect the public. That's a load of horse shit. First of all, if we was to ever be able to do a survey, to complete a survey of law enforcement agents across the country, I bet you damn good and well the vast majority of them don't completely understand how the law even works either. And if they don't know, and the legislators don't even know how the law works when they pass these laws, they don't even think about the consequences of the laws when they pass them. It just sounds good, and so therefore they do it. Many of them don't understand the law, and if the lawmakers, if the law enforcement agents, if attorneys struggle to understand the meaning of law, when it comes to sex offenders. How in the hell do you expect the average Joe citizen to either? You say, well, it's just as simple as that. You know what? Life happens. You know what? I've been registering for 14 years, and there's a couple of times where I've gotten the threatening letters in the mail because I'm late on my registration because, I'm expected to keep up with this, and my life is supposed to revolve around it, and I'm apparently not supposed to have a life outside of the registry. But you know what? Life happens. You got, especially in college, you got tests, you got practice, you got, you got your work study job or whatever. Hell, I've got a lot less in my life to do, and I still forget to do things from time to time. At 40 years old, you just plain old start forgetting things on occasion. It happens. And the thing about it is, they ultimately dropped that charge. They cited him, yes, but then they dropped the charges because guess what? The courts pretty much decided that Heimlich's excuse was right because they don't understand the law. Law enforcement agents a lot of times don't properly explain the law. I'm in a rare place where the registration officer will actually sit down and they'll give me a printout. There's other people who go and register and they have to practically beg or threaten the law enforcement agent with lawsuits just to get a printout to say that they've even registered. And that's caused a lot of problems because some people have gotten cited for failing to register when they actually went in to register, and the idiots at the law enforcement desk didn't even put his information inside. So, yeah, ignorance of the law, you're putting the burden on the people who are least responsible for registration and not on the people more responsible, the people that we actually pay thousands of dollars a year to be law enforcement agents. Protect the public, my ass. It's protecting the assets of the government. So anyways, on to bullet point G. There are 756,000 sex offenders in a country with a population of 321 million. If we use those same ratios on Oregon State's 2016 campus enrollment, which is 31,303 people, you would expect there to be approximately 70 registered sex offenders on campus. The other 69 or so are allowed to go to school, matriculate, pursue rehabilitation, etc., without the rest of us in arms. Some are fashioning this into an argument as to why Heimlich shouldn't be singled out. I'll go back to point B above. As an athletics representative of the university and public figure, Heimlich plays by different rules. Same would go if it turned out after 3 years at the university, hypothetically, that a registered sex offender was the campus student body president. Well, that's a matter of your personal opinion, your personal feelings. Your math is a little bit off. First of all, at last count, there was 860,000 names, not 750,000, so there might be an extra 2 or 3 registered people on campus, although I find that rather unlikely. You're going by law of averages. It may be more, it may be less. May not be. He may be the only one for all. He may be only one or two. Who knows? In lots of other places, registered citizens aren't even given the opportunity to better themselves by going to higher education. And stuff. Well, it may be true that a sports athlete plays by different rules, but again, what you're trying to do is interject your personal opinion on this. And again, like I said earlier, bringing back my earlier point, that the campus, you're expecting the campus to retroactively punish a person who has already served his time, in which there's no rules, whether at the university or in the NCAA, that prevent him from having the opportunity. Again, you're expecting them to enforce a rule on an action in which they had no jurisdiction over. And since you brought up Penn State, since you had brought up Penn State earlier, there have been times that the NCAA has overstepped their boundaries, and their sanctions against Penn State was one of them. There's been times that sports teams or sports um, organizations have made bad judgment calls. Um, one might, I'm sure all the Patriots fans right now are probably saying, "Hey, Tom Brady got suspended last year for 4 games because he deflated the footballs and stuff." We all know the Patriots are a bunch of low down, dirty cheaters. They've done it multiple times, over the years. And stuff. But again, that's different because every incident on the field, that's different because Tom Brady was and still is a current football player, and that's that again, that's a little bit differently. And it all goes back to principles of you're trying to retroactively punish somebody. If he was student body president, so to hell what? You know, what should he be? What should he be allowed to do? Um, you want you're saying on one hand you want him to be a part of this rehabilitation, to allow like these other hypothetical 70 or so registered citizens on campus. You want them to also be rehabilitated, but you don't want them to be a part of the student body, so you want them to be separated. How is that supposed to be rehabilitation? It's not. It's isolation. Isolation is the antithesis of rehabilitation. Moving on. Bullet point H. Heimlich's decision to shelve himself out of respect for his victim and teammates was the right call. I wrote a column about it early on Friday. I'm told by a baseball source that Casey decided early on Friday that it was in Heimlich's hands. I think Casey should have made the decision himself, but I understand why he did it. It gave Heimlich an opportunity to demonstrate he has leadership qualities and take some public responsibility. The kid made the right call. Will he pitch again? We don't know. Why the open-ended statement? He won't be less of a distraction in Omaha with the national media on the scene, and I expect the Beavers to make it there. If he pitches, there's going to be an appropriate amount of national outcry. Do I think he made the right decision? You know what? What he did might be admirable. Some people might feel he made the right decision, but as a registered citizen, then I would say, you know what? I want to stand up for my rights to be, to be who I am, no matter what people think. There's lots of people who think that if you're a registered citizen, then you don't deserve to do this. You don't deserve to be able to have nice things in life. You should suffer and squalor, be welfare dependent, be unemployed, be homeless, or dead, or in prison for the rest of your life. People hate when we have anything. So for me, if I was in his position, I probably would have said, hey, I've helped to get you this far. We're going to the we've gone to the playoffs. I've been a part of this, and what I want to, if we're supposedly a team, then I want you to have my back as well. Here's a golden opportunity for a university to take a stand on something that is right, not on what people think. And so that, this is a wasted opportunity. I would say, hey, let the guy pitch. Let's forget the fact that, of his past and all this stuff that the news reporters put out. And the fact, what, he earned that spot. He's been squeaky clean since he went to college. And so, he served his time. Allow the guy the opportunity to do the thing that he did to become a productive member of society, as opposed to the alternative. Now he's no longer on the team. His career's probably over, and stuff. So did he do the right thing? Maybe he might have done what people wanted to try to please them. But if he was anything like me, I'd say the hell with trying to please people. I'm not here to please people. I'm here to make a stand. I would, the thing about it is, he could have been in the same position as, say, Colin Kaepernick. Somebody brought up the fact, oh, Colin Kaepernick doesn't have a job no more, and because he took a stand by, well, actually he took a knee and not a stand, protesting the police stuff. Well, sometimes when you take a stand, and I ain't gonna lie to you, I don't particularly like Colin Kaepernick either, but but you have to admire the fact that he took a stand for something he believed in, or in this case, took a knee because he wouldn't stand during the national anthem. And why I don't like the fact that he was doing it for Black Lives Matter, I have to admire the fact that he did it for something he believed in, and he did it without punching people in the face or rioting or whatever. I may not like Kaepernick, I may not like his message, but you know what? He had the right to do what he did. And if Luke Heimlich decided he wanted to play, you know what? He would have had every freaking right to do so. And if people, you're wanting to talk about national outcry, you need to read the comment section, Canzano, because there's a lot of outcry, but it's not against him, it's against you. Bullet point I. For those making the he deserves a second chance argument, where was that written? You make your own second chance in life. Also, your first. Heimlich is in control of his future just as he's always been. He will determine where his life leads. Your actions, if inappropriate, will result in opportunities being closed to you. That's no one else's fault but your own. It's probably a good message for young people to absorb. Yes, when people make mistakes, they get punished. That's why we have a criminal justice system. If you commit a crime, you do time. And we hear that cliche, if you can't do the time, don't do the crime. You know what? It's a very dismissive statement to make the people, because the thing about it is when we created the criminal justice system, it was supposed to be within the confines of the justice system that a person gets punished and gets rehabilitated, so that way when that day comes that they're released and back out into the public, that they will be a more productive member of society. But we don't really invest in the rehabilitative aspect of it and stuff. To me, this statement is just that same boring, dismissive attitude that you'll get from the tough on crime schmucks, that voted for Donald Trump and probably cheer every idiotic thing that Jeff Sessions has said since becoming the Attorney General. The guy is a space cadet. I mean, come on, you want to bring back the failed war on drugs? Do I do drugs? No. Do I like people who do drugs? No. I personally don't even like people who drink alcohol. But to send somebody to prison for years for having a couple of joints or or doing some drugs, I question the logic of that, because a criminal record ruins somebody for life, and your chances of overcoming that are very small. So, again, what he feels opportunities should be closed to him. There's people who say that, again, people who commit certain crimes shouldn't be able to do certain things. Well, the alternative, of course, is one of two things. Okay, you want him to be unemployed and on welfare. That's always a possibility. And if you're a registered citizen, then that's a very high probability for you. I've already looked at unemployment rates for Alabama and found them to be over 10 times. You're more than 10 times more likely to be unemployed if you're a registered citizen than if you're just a regular Alabamian with no sex offense record. That's pretty astounding. So, the thing about it is that, at what point should a person even be allowed to become a productive member of society? But hey, those of you who want to complain about me being on welfare, well, you know what? There was a time that I had a job, and I would have continued to have a job if it wasn't for the fact that you have a public registry that allows people to look up where you work and harass you at work. So I don't feel the least bit freaking guilty about taking your money. So, pay them, if all you Trump tards, complaining about us welfare people, well, guess what? Your wonderful laws that you support help make that possible. So I want to thank each and every one of you useful idiots who voted for Trump, because thanks to people like him, that continue to keep people like me, welfare dependent, I have no need to go out and look for a job ever. So thank you for that. Bullet point J. No one will say it, but there is a small internal rift going on at Oregon State over this issue. The baseball program feels left on an island by the university administration. Ray's statement to campus, geared at covering the university's backside when it comes to Title IX, went over like a bag of bricks with those who believed he should have circled up with the athletics program. I think Ray is too good a leader and too powerful a personality to let this become a clear-cut division, but it's something to watch. Well, here's the thing. When you were a part of an inquisition like Ray has, obviously you had said that he was a part of the inquisition against the Penn State University football program. The Penn State University program was way more, was very cooperative in allowing themselves to be flogged for things that they should not have been cited for. Again, that was the NCAA overstepping their boundaries, relying on a report by a complete failure of an FBI director, Louis Freeh. Louis Freeh, should I mention Waco? Should I mention Ruby Ridge? That's all you need to know about Louis Freeh, a complete idiot. And yet, we're looking at this guy. Of course he's not going to take the plunge. He helped lead the inquisition against Penn State. And, the more people go back and look at Penn State in retrospect, the more people are starting to realize that some of what was put out there is utter nonsense, that it was very similar to other inquisitions like the daycare scandals of the 80s and whatnot. But, of course, you also have the people, if you're an inquisitor, you're certainly not going to think of anything but prosecuting people. That's exactly what you did. That's exactly what Ray did. And so, he's not going to help the very people in this case. And this is nothing compared to compared to the controversy surrounding Penn State. This person wasn't, molesting children on campus. This person wasn't accused of any improprieties while a college student at Oregon State University. So it's a non-issue. Anyways, moving on. Bullet point K. Ray's response when asked about the issue by KGW TV on Friday was exactly in line with the above point. He asked whether it was appropriate for Heimlich to pitch. He said, "Look, you make your judgment, I'll make mine." It was a non-answer, and I think it was fashioned that way to avoid further splintering his own campus. Well, I certainly don't blame the guy for making the statement. I think their plan of action, of course, is what we ultimately saw, where Mr. Heimlich ended up recusing himself from the team and sparing them any more distractions. And I think that was probably, in hopes that they were going to have to do that. Bullet point L, if Oregon State isn't already running retroactive background checks on athletes, I'd be surprised. Also, I'd be surprised if Ray doesn't come out this summer after a cooling off period with a policy that prohibits Beavers coaches from offering scholarships to felony sex offenders and athletes with felony domestic violence convictions. He's been too strong on the subjects, including his handling of gang rape survivor Brenda Tracy, to do anything short of that. Besides the whole name-dropping thing, yes, it seems to me that Canzano is trying to influence university policy, but again, running background checks would not be a fruitful endeavor, especially in cases where it was handled in juvenile court. And so, there may be a lot of incidences that still fly under the radar that may come out someday and be in another Oregon Live article, media blitz like we saw this past weekend. So, background checks aren't foolproof. Again, it's a fool's game, and it also goes against the idea of rehabilitation. So, um, in many cases, people with criminal records struggle to better themselves because it's hard for them to get a job. So in many cases, getting a scholarship would be a blessing to somebody with a felony record because they may not otherwise be able to pay for it. Colleges are very expensive now. I was fortunate to have earned a scholarship myself, but of course I wasn't a felon at the time. But I had I was awarded a state. I was in the foster system, and that comes with its own set of stigmas, which is pretty damn close to, a juvenile with a record. Again, this is his personal opinion, and he's trying to influence public policy, and chances are Oregon State might do just that as a knee-jerk reaction to this particular story. Bullet point M. The usual partisan bickering between Ducks fans and Beavers fans mostly doesn't bother me. But when it comes to a serious issue regarding a registered sex offender and a child who was molested, it sickens me that some simply draw their conclusion based upon which team they root for. We need to remove the sports here and get back to the notion that human life has value. If you're a Ducks fan celebrating the bad news, grow up. If you're a Beavers fan who is digging in and attacking the story, or worse, the victim, take a big step back and ask yourself if you've lost your way. This isn't a partisan issue, it's a human issue. There's only one side. Well, according to Canzano, there's only one side, and that side is his side. And if, he's routinely blocked people on Twitter. He's shut down the comment sections on his articles because he doesn't want dissenting opinions like mine getting in the way of his witch hunt. I think he's a little disappointed that there's not enough people rolling up torches and sharpening pitchforks to join him on this witch hunt. Do I really think that there's a lot of bickering between Duck fans and Beavers fans? Maybe to some extent. I mean, if you're a true sports fanatic, yes, some of them get really out of hand. Now, I'm from Alabama, and in Alabama, you have the University of Alabama, the Crimson Tide, the 16-time national champions, the best, arguably the best team ever in college football, and then you've got Auburn University, which wins a national championship once every century or so. But always has a pretty decent football team, and the rivalry, can't even talk today, the rivalry there is huge. And so when Auburn won the national championship back in 2010, some really fanatical person went and poisoned the trees at Toomer's Corner in Auburn, which is where the Auburn fans go to throw toilet paper and celebrate their victories against other teams. And so, that's how fanatical sports people can get. I mean, there's, on a great rare occasion, there's been assaults or even murders over sports-related arguments. Yes, people can get fanatical, but they're a minority. I don't really have a dog in the fight with Oregon and Oregon State. I kind of like them both, so I guess that makes me a platypus, duckbill and beaver tail. So I don't really dislike either team. To me, I liked reading the story of Oregon, the University of Oregon giving this Woods fellow a second chance. I don't like what the person did, he during his teenage years, he was a bully, but you know what? He learned from his mistakes, and Oregon gave him a chance, to play where everybody else might have shunned him, and, Of course, as I stated earlier, it didn't come out. He didn't turn out to be a big NFL star. He just ended up having a normal life because not everybody makes it to the big leagues. But but he was eternally grateful that Oregon gave him a chance, and now he's living a productive life. And stuff. So I admired that. And what I really hope is that Oregon State takes an unpopular but needed stance that this kid was rehabilitated, he served his time, and deserves the same opportunity as everyone else. And as so long as that he doesn't abuse that privilege. I mean, it's the same line of reasoning that the Bengals giving Joe Mixon a chance, and what. That's not that's not the same as saying, "Yay, we're all for molestation of kids." It's perfectly fine to go out and touch children. No, we're not saying that. But the guy was punished according to the law. Some people may want more than that. Well, you know what? Too damn bad. You can want more than what the law allows. If you want the law, if you don't like the way the law works, then then you can always reform the system. That's what I'm trying to do too. So, that's the way you handle it. Not trying to ruin a person's life just because you don't like the fact that you didn't feel he served enough time. I hear a lot of that. You know who I hear that from the most? The people that turn out to be vigilantes. And that's exactly who wrote this article. Anyways, moving on. Bullet point N, I kind of scrolled past it a little bit. I got to go back up. It says, on my radio show on Friday, we took calls from a mostly male audience that defended the victim. I was moved by the discourse. It was authentic, charged in the right direction, and included some powerful moments from callers. Some called in to share their stories of abuse, others their anger, but it was a measured glance at why the story has splintered us. And so and then of course he posts a link to the thing. Well, here's the thing. You're running a radio show, you pre-screen your callers, you're not going to let people come in with a dissenting opinion because, as you stated earlier, there's only one side to this issue, your side. And yes, and of course, I'm not surprised that the overwhelming majority of people that called you is a mostly male audience because, yes, there's some women who love sports, but let's be honest, most people that are watching the male College World Series are male baseball fanatics, and so you appeal to, the sports shows, ESPN and whatnot, have tried hard to cater to women by bringing female sportscasters in and whatnot, but sports is the one place that's sort of male dominated, so that's not shocking. And yes, some people have been abused. And of course, and stuff. But at the same time, you're feeding to the victim side. And so it was one-sided because it was tailor-made to cater to your personal needs. You won't bring a person like me on your show, I can assure you that. You don't want me to come on your show and tell you where you're wrong on many points. No, you won't give the other side a voice. So, to me, you're just blowing more smoke up your ass, quite frankly. Bullet point O, Justin Myers, my friend and colleague and friend at 102.9 FM at 7:50 a.m., hosts a brand new show with Devon Pouncey weekdays, 9 a.m. to noon. He's only been on the air for 5 days, but Myers delivered a haymaker on Friday. He spoke openly about his own repeated abuse at age 5 in what was a powerful segment of radio. There are no winners in this story, but one of the things that has come from it is sharing of stories such as this. He's a hero in my eyes, and I didn't want to post this without mentioning that. Well, the thing about it is, when you have to, if you constantly define your life by something that happened to you at age 5, then to me, I find that problematic. As a person on the registry, I have to look at I was forced to look at everything from the other side. See, people who are, who claim to be abused as children are not the only people in the world that that try to pull up things in their past as an excuse for actions that they do later in life. And stuff. But of course, when you're a registered person, you're not allowed that same dignity. You can't say, okay, I had a shitty childhood. I had a terrible childhood. I was bullied by people. I was physically and mentally abused by my stepfather. I was abandoned in a hotel room at age 14. I became a ward of the state. And they sent me off to places where I was abused in institutions, by adults and by by the other clients at said places, until I was finally able to get away at the age of 18, and by earning a college scholarship, and that's how I was able to get out of mine. But you know what? I can't use that as an excuse for my behavior. What happened to me as a kid is not, it really, yeah, you can say, okay, it kind of, it made me reflect on certain things, but at the same time, you can't say that it dictated how I became, how I am as an adult. I don't believe the constant retelling of these stories do anything to help people, because when I tell people, and I start thinking about all the things that happened to me as a kid, the only thing I get is angry and upset. And, the thing is, I don't think about it that much, because yes, there's nothing I can do about what happened to me as a kid. Most of the players involved in all the things that happened to me as a kid. But again, you imagine carrying so much hatred in you for decades that, I don't know, it reminds me of this episode in Family Guy where Peter Griffin goes and tracks down his childhood bully, and, because, his son was getting bullied, and he was trying to teach, his son, I don't know if it was to stick up for himself or whatever. So Peter Griffin tracks down his bully, and of course his bully is now, this pitiful, disabled person with a cane who can barely hold himself up, and Peter Griffin starts, bullying the bully, and, who bullied him in childhood, and of course, his son ended up having to stop him from being a bully himself, and says, "Look, you're no more different than, you're no different than, than he was," and stuff. And that's what that's the way I see things. Imagine if we go our entire lives waiting for that one moment we can get revenge against somebody who did some wrong to you, 30, 40 years ago. That's why the constant rehashing of these stories, making people go back and relive traumatic events throughout their life, defining themselves as the victim for their entire lives. That to me is a huge problem. I think that does a lot more harm than good. And to these people, I say, what you need to do is you need to go find the book by Samantha Geimer, where she describes all the stuff that she has endured since being sexually abused by Roman Polanski. So we all know that story, because it's been around around off and on for an entire generation. And Samantha Geimer doesn't want to be known as the sex victim girl for her entire life, and has rebelled against it, much to the chagrin of the victim industry. As a matter of fact, she was just in the news no more than a day or two ago, that she's trying to get the state of California to completely drop the case, and the state will not do so. And she says, well, if I would, that her voice doesn't matter, because she is, asking for mercy, for the accused. She says, well, if I was they would certainly take her statements into account if she was coming in to condemn Polanski and say throw the book at him. And so that's one good example. There's another example I can think of that hits a lot closer to home to me, and that has to do with an incident that happened here in Cincinnati back in 2009, when we had one of those rare high-profile tragedies. A 13-year-old girl named Esme Kenny was murdered by a person who had been in prison for 20-something years for murder, but he also had a a sex crime on his record, so they made a bigger deal out of the fact that he was a sex offender than a murderer. Um, and so he had escaped from a treatment facility, killed this person. There was a lot of public outrage. Um, and people wanted to shut down the treatment center. And so the parents of Esme came out in support of the treatment, say, look, they might be able to reform some things, but we don't want the place shut down, especially in the name of our daughter, because they believe that rehabilitation works for a lot of people. And they had even written things publicly stating to that effect. And of course, the people turned on them because they wouldn't be the good victim. They wouldn't go along with this stuff. And so to me, those are the real heroes, not people that constantly relive some traumatic event. Oh my God, it's, we can't even, and that's the thing, you can't even address it without sounding, without people, oh, you're being heartless because okay, something happened to you when you're 5 years old. Well, but you're 45 years old. So, what, do you always go back and point to that every time you fuck up in your life? Come on. You tell me the man up all the time, accept responsibility. Well, here's the thing, that works both ways. It's a two-way street. Okay, you was abused as a kid, so what? The thing about it is, you're an adult now, and the world isn't going to revolve around. People want people want the world to revolve around them because of something that happened to them at age 5 years old. To me, that's just played out ludicrous. Anyways, moving on. Well, I'm getting to the end of this because this is, again, I told you, this is a very long article. Bullet point P. The warm ovation for Heimlich from the crowd of 4,000 before Oregon State's game on Friday was no doubt troubling. It's the kind of stuff I'd expect from fans at Baylor or Penn State. Maybe I'm missing what the ovation was about, but I didn't think so. Well, you know what? Everybody who was in the lineup got an ovation. Not everybody, not everybody, reads, in Omaha reads the Oregonian. I'm sure most of the people in Omaha who's read the Oregonian were fellow activists like myself, but, and stuff. So before, it can become an issue. That's, Heimlich recused himself, of course, from playing, and stuff. And of course, we've already addressed the Penn State issue. I believe it was, 10% fact and 90% BS. But that's just a low blow right there. That's just, that's like somebody who addresses a registered person by saying, well, you're a John Cooey, or a John Wayne Gacy or something. So, that's just a personal attack. It's ad hominem. It's not even, it's not even a good statement. Again, this is why I don't consider this article to be journalism. Home stretch here. Point Q. For those who say Heimlich has paid his debt to society or been punished for his crime and should be left alone. Huh? An important part of his punishment is that he has to register as a sex offender. There's a reason a felony crime is a felony crime. The punishment is supposed to act as a deterrent. Okay. Here's the biggest idiotic statement in the entire article, although there's been a lot of them. First of all, I want to thank Mr. Canzano for continuing to show why the U.S. Supreme Court got it wrong in Smith v. Doe in 2003 when they claimed that the registration is not punishment. It's merely a regulatory measure, and it's not supposed to be a deterrent. I mean, studies have shown that the sex offender registry is not a deterrent. As a matter of fact, it may actually increase the likelihood that a person on the registry gets stressed out and commits a crime. So, deterrent. What you need to do is you need to march your little ass down to the Criminal Justice Department of Oregon State University and take a few classes. because if you did some research, you don't even need to go to classes. What you need to do is you need to go to oncefallen.com and read my website. Then again, it might be too, I don't really write at a third grade level, so it might be above your head. You certainly write at a third grade level, so I imagine that you read at one too. But anyways, that's been proven wrong. This is, but we do thank you. You're a useful idiot. I really thank you from the bottom of my heart for mentioning it, for saying that the registry is punishment. Because everybody knows damn good and well it's not regulatory. Bullet point R. Let's be clear. I don't wish for Heimlich to die or rot or never be allowed to better himself. I don't know how anyone can draw that conclusion. I feel awful for the victim of his crime. I think about her first. I pray for her, and I know she's in for a long recovery. She had her childhood stolen. She will deal with this for life. Long after that child, I think about the person who victimized her. The only positive thing that can come from this story is that Heimlich lives a long, productive life that has meaning, that he looks back at age 90 and realizes that he's overcame a horrible crime and done the best he could. The meaning in his life does not rely upon baseball. When you make it about that, you minimize the value of his life. Well, I would say that what you did certainly minimized the value of his life. And if he looks back at age 90 and realizes that he overcame a horrible crime and done the best he could, then he knows that one of the hugest obstacles to that, to being a success in his life, is the fact that you and your fellow dipshits at the Oregonian has taken the time to put a huge wall in front of him for him to try to overcome. I don't see how that can be a positive. You know what would have been a positive? Allowing the guy the opportunity to continue to make something out of himself rather than having to step down from the thing that he enjoyed most in his life because of your self-righteousness, and you didn't want him to play, and you don't personally feel like he should have that opportunity. So don't sit here and be hypocritical. You say you don't know how anybody can draw the conclusion that you don't want him to better himself when you made it a frickin' point to write a series of articles condemning this person and wanting to make sure that he never has the opportunity to play sports ever. Oh, but yet we're not supposed to be able to see how you don't want him to better himself, or pretty much you want him to die or rot because you've done everything short of saying, hey, I want to go pull a bullet in his head. But let's address it, but of course, let's address this other thing. I am so sick of hearing this victim industry hogwash, you even read the report in one of the reports that was written. The girl that was the victim supposedly from what was being reported, doesn't even remember the incident even happening. But when you constantly make an issue out of it, that is when a person gets traumatized. Let's go back to the statement, the article that Samantha Geimer published the other day when she said, she feels far more traumatized by the judicial system and all the stuff she's had to go through for the last 40 years because she's been labeled sex crime victim, and not just any sex crime victim, but celebrity sex crime victim. And so it's pushed her in the spotlight for 40 years. And so it was society that continued to tether her to this incident, continued to define her. And even in her own article that she was written, the headline says sex crime victim, that before they even say her name, it's it's Samantha Geimer, not sex crime victim. Is that, is her asking for mercy an excuse for what he did? No, but she dealt with it in her own way without the help of society. She got over it in spite of the public and not because of the public. And so, by writing this article, a lot of people have called him out and say, you know what, by writing this article, you, John Canzano, you have contributed to the trauma. And I won't, and you know what? They're probably right. You know, and he wants to deny that we can find out who this girl is. Trust me, there's ways to find out. Um, especially in an age where people are more than willing to have elaborate Facebook pages posting pictures of people and naming names. I mean, that's how I outed a number of vigilante trolls who came after me over the years. Um, I don't buy the whole childhood stolen thing. That's victim industry propaganda. People choose to remain victims their entire life or to overcome. And this cult of victimhood. When I say cult of victimhood, I'm not talking about just sex crimes. I'm talking about the mentality in our culture in which claiming victimhood status becomes an exalted position in society. Look at Black Lives Matter. Look at conservative Christianity, the evangelicals. They're always look at the people who are always talking about gun rights and want open carry laws and stuff. Each of these groups rely on a status of victimhood. It relies on the government. In the case of the gun rights people, the government's trying to take our guns away. So, and it leads to some outlandish conspiracies like, the Sandy Hook shooting, that was all just a bunch of people play acting in order to get the government to take away our gun rights and stuff. And the most the government has ever done to quote unquote take away gun rights is to do background checks for certain people and to and to have a waiting period of like a week or so for you to be able to purchase a gun. Oh my God, that's annoying, but that's not the same as not having the right to ever have a gun. Unless you're a felon. I can't carry a gun. I think I should have the right to have one, especially given the fact that you made me a big freaking target. I couldn't be more of a target if I wore a bullseye hat. So, so there's that. In the case of Black Lives Matter, of course, they see everything as racism. Ironically enough, all these freaking Trump tards is like, all these people, all these Hillary supporters were special snowflakes and social justice warriors who also cry victimhood a lot. But Trump tards also also cry victimhood a lot. Every time somebody bashes Trump or makes fun of him, they get really defensive about it and they feel victimized by it. So, to them, I say the same things they tell the people on the other side. Suck it up, Buttercup. Why is it that we, in our society, that if you have had any other kind of traumatic, potentially traumatic experience, say, your house was blown away by a tornado while you were in it, your parents got shot and fed to satanic cult members in front of you or something, or whatever, or you went through a traumatic accident or something, that with just about every other kind of thing that could possibly happen to you, we feel, yes, we sympathize when it happens and it's a terrible thing, but at some point in our life, we expect you to overcome and, and be a productive member of society. So, we don't have stories where somebody was in a wreck and they got paralyzed and it's like, oh, I'm not going to even try to walk again. No, we love the stories where people learn to walk again because that, it's inspiring, it's a good, that's a true hero story. When you constantly relive your past and you constantly go back to your 5-year-old inner child, that's not overcoming. But for some reason, we consider this to be different. I think that's a load of horse crap, and stuff. It's the victim cult bull crap, and stuff. But I guess people don't want to hear that just because it's coming out of my mouth. But you don't have to listen to me. Listen to people like Samantha Geimer. If you want to listen to somebody, trust me. If anybody has a right to say it, it should be her. And yes, she's referred to this as a victim ministry. All you people who complain about my use of that term, why don't you complain to her about it? I'm no different. So, the final point, he says, I will leave this discussion here. I hope you all have a wonderful weekend. Hug your children. Pray for the now 11-year-old and hope that Oregon State and all the others strives to be a place we can all be proud of. Okay, you don't want harm to come to Mr. Heimlich, but notice in that last little statement, you forgot all about him. Why not pray for him too? If you're a praying person. Obviously, you've made it clear. You're completely one-sided. You're completely biased. You're a complete moron. You contradict yourself at every turn. And this is a complete act of vigilante violence. That's what it is. Don't pretend it's anything it isn't. You're a moron. You're a big fucking idiot. And I hope that I get the chance to tell it to you in person someday, because you're obviously too much of a fucking coward to allow people to say it to your face any other way. I listen to dissenting opinions all the time. You should grow a pair and learn to do the same. This is Derek Logue for Once Fallen. These opinions are my own, and if you don't like it, too bad.